Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. It's Sunday. What are we doing here on Law and Legitimacy? I mean, I thought I'm supposed to be getting ready to go to court. I thought I'm supposed to be objecting and only to have Mike sustain them. I thought we're supposed to be confined to a meager.
I sustain them because it's Sunday. Every other day I'll overrule.
That's true. That's true. Actually, I can dream. You know, and we should be watching the clock and worrying about time and trying to fit a couple topics into too little time. Welcome, folks. Special edition, Basic Boys Brunch stream, Law and Legitimacy. We're back at you. And why, you say, why would we discomfit your Sunday? Because the world is discomfiting everyone. And we just were talking the other day and thought, why don't we all open up the stream? And of course, Justin Carter from Connecticut was demanding that we do so.
Yeah, demanding. He said borderline begging, but I'll say demanding. That's
no, he was threatening to become a MSNBC viewer. He told me in a tweet that if I don't come on the air on Sunday, he's going to start watching Rachel Maddow. And I thought, oh my God.
He told me he was going to be a correspondent. And you should see these DMs he's sending me. It's kind of nuts. Justin's just like, hanging it all over our head. Hey, Justin.
It is what it is. So welcome to the world. Welcome to your world. No Proud Boys today, thankfully. It's Sunday, although I've already been on the phone with federal prosecutors talking about the issues to come this week as we try to wrap up that never-ending trial. But I think all eyes will be this week on Manhattan, where Donald Trump is expected to be arraigned on Tuesday. I mean, and from what I'm reading, I fully expect him to turn up. I mean, are you seeing otherwise, Mike?
No, I'm seeing the same thing, and it's a little embarrassing. I think on the DeSantis side of things that he could have handled this so many different ways, and I don't want to dwell on that too much. But you're correct. I think that Trump's legal team has made arrangements for him to turn himself in. He'll be booked. And, one interesting question is, how does Secret Service, intertwine with all of this stuff? You've got a former president, presidential candidate turning himself in for something like that. Bonding. I don't know what thoughts you have on that. Hopefully they're not going to try to keep him incarcerated for charges that we still don't know the substance of, right?
Well, so, we are obviously in virgin territory in American history. We've never had a sitting or former president charged with a crime and presented in court as an accused criminal. And every former president is entitled to lifetime Secret Service protection. So the question, and the Secret Service is pretty intense. I mean, not long ago, there was a CPAC conference here in Washington, D.C., and I went to 2 days of it just because I'd never been and I had some downtime. And the first day, you were able to walk into the conference center and leave as though it were any other conference. On the second day, however, Trump was scheduled to speak at 5:30. I arrived at the conference center at 9:30 and had to wait in a long line where we were scanned through a metal detector, much as though we were going into a courthouse, our belongings searched. And when we left to go to lunch, we had to re-enter again. And so security was, I don't want to say airtight, but intense. A criminal court is not a political conference. People who come to political or criminal court, arguably have issues. That's why they got the invitation to come to court in the first place. So I suspect Secret Service concerns will be heightened. And I know that a couple weeks ago when Trump was thought to be on his way to court, I talked to friends in Manhattan, and basically what they told me is the courthouse was basically shut down to other business the day Trump was expected to arrive. Cases set for the Tuesday, that first Tuesday, were moved either to Monday or Wednesday, and he was going to be the only business in court. So I think that there'll be a conflict and friction between Trump and his handlers. While he's entitled to Secret Service protection, I don't think the Secret Service owns him. And so there are interesting waiver issues. I think if Trump wanted to, he would be whisked into the basement, taken up a back elevator, taken into a courtroom where people had to pass security to be present in it, whisked privately to an arraignment, to a side cell where he'd be booked, and he'll probably be given a promise to appear or a release on his own recognizance, an ROR, as they say, and then whisked out the building privately. But I don't think he wants that. I think, and this is an interesting question. Suppose Trump says, I want to go to court like any other American. I want to walk in the front door and I want to walk out the front door. And I don't want a bunch of Secret Service guys hanging around me because
I have to stop you. I want them to treat me like anybody else, as if they haven't already been treating him like dirt for the past 6 years.
No, but I mean, yeah, well, that's true. No, I get that. No, but I mean, in terms of the criminal process, I think that the theatrics of this are significant. And if Trump is smart, what he'll and if he's half the showman, I think he is. I think he will want to walk in the doors as alone as he possibly can, appear in front of the judge accompanied by his lawyers, and nowhere else, or no one else rather, so that he can make the case that, this is state of New York against Donald J. Trump, and it's an outrage, and you picked on me because I'm the Donald. So there'll be a lot of arm wrestling, I suspect, with the Secret Service when he's presented. He's going to, and we called it here first, folks. He's going to be presented before Judge Juan Merchan, Merchan. I had an interesting experience with Juan Merchan a decade ago, maybe a little bit less. I was representing Anna Christina, the so-called soccer mom madam, before Merchan, and I was coming in as out-of-state counsel.
The Manhattan madam, yeah,
and he didn't want to let her have counsel of choice. He said, there are 70,000 lawyers in Manhattan. Miss Christina, are you telling me that you need to pick somebody from Connecticut? And she said, that's my choice. And he said, well, I'm not so sure about that. And I pulled a case out of my briefcase and I said, Judge, you may want to read the case of United States of America versus Gonzalez Lopez. The Sixth Amendment gives a person the right to their counsel of choice. And if you don't want to let me in the case, that's just fine. We'll let you process this first time as a rehearsal for the time that matters when I come in. I gave him the case. He took a brief recess. He came out, and I was welcomed to appear in the state of New York on behalf of Miss Christina thereafter. So, he's reported to be a no nonsense, tough as nails judge. I don't know. He handled the scrum with Anna Christina reasonably well, but now he'll be up to his eyeballs in mayhem with Donald Trump. And here, now, this. For you law nerds, take a look at the Sam Shepard case that made it to the United States Supreme Court. I can't recall the year, but Shepard was a habeas corpus proceeding where his conviction. This is a physician accused of killing his own wife. This was the inspiration for the television show, the Fugitive series, The Fugitive, and the movie The Fugitive. Shepard's case was tried in a, quote, according to the Supreme Court, circus-like environment, both inside the court and out. Well, there's nothing that Merchan can do about the circus-like environment that will obtain outside the Manhattan courthouse on Tuesday, but he can't control the proceedings in his courtroom. And I think that will be a challenge for him, because I think that Donald Trump is not used to being a guest on somebody else's reality TV show. And right now he's going to be a litigant. And I think all of the action in this case, at least for the first couple of months, is how Merchan will react to Trump. Will there be a gag order? Trump is already talking about the prosecution. He's already talking about the judge. He's already talking about the nature of the proceedings, and he's got plenty to talk about. We haven't seen the indictment yet, but it looks like a very thin criminal case. As to his paying Stormy Daniels hush money to keep quiet their dalliance years before on the eve of the presidential election in 2016, the statute of limitations has run on those claims. And so these are going to be record-keeping offenses of one sort or another related to how this payment was recorded, reported, and accounted for within Trump's organizations. Okay, but these are kind of nominal charges that wouldn't normally put a person before in a criminal court. But here's Trump, and I suspect that Trump, and he's got a powerful case to be made. He's being charged not for what he did, but because of who he is. And so Alvin Bragg, as we've referred to him here on this show, Fat Alvin, referring to the Fat Albert character on Bill Cosby, he's going to stand up and scream that justice got to be done. And no one is above the law. And that's true. But that doesn't mean the law is always right when it selects a target. And in the case of state of New York or people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump, in this case, that indictment better be more than faulty record keeping. That indictment better show some extraordinary criminal activity to be worth the weight that is being placed on it. So now we'll have Donald Trump appearing in front of a judge, a man with a mouth the size of the lower 48, and he's going to have things to say. But Merchan is going to have to keep control of that proceedings, and Merchan is a very decisive jurist. One might say a control freak. So you're going to have two immovable objects colliding in a courtroom, and the Donald's going to want to talk, and the judge is going to say, "This is my courtroom, sir. When you're running for president, you can say whatever you like, but in this courtroom, you speak when spoken to. Do you understand?" And Trump may respond by saying, "I understand that this prosecution is an outrage." Bam! Mr. Trump, one more of those and you'll be held in contempt. And the judge will say, "The last time I was held in contempt, I had to pay with contempt. I had to pay hush money." Bam! That'll be a fine of some sort. And the judge might just say, "I am issuing an order consistent with my inherent supervisory authority that neither the parties, meaning the state of New York, nor Donald Trump, nor those associated with them, can utter extrajudicial pretrial statements that might influence these proceedings." I don't know what that means. Now, Justin says, how do you fight a gag order? Well, the way you fight a gag order is the way I have fought them. You file a motion. Yeah. No, you file a motion in the court saying you don't have the constitutional authority to do that. When the judge denies it, you take an appeal. So in Connecticut, in a case involving a now deceased client of ours named Fotis Doulos, we took an emergency public interest appeal to the Connecticut Supreme Court and challenged the ability of the court to silence, not me, because lawyers can be silenced by a judge, arguably. There's a case called Gentile versus Nevada Bar Association, which made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And, lawyers are officers of the court. There are limits on what they can say during a trial. In the New Jersey case, in the Nevada case, the Gentile case, the lawyer came out on the day a client was indicted and had a lot to say about the indictment, had a lot to say about the charges against his client. Nevada bar officials attacked his law license and he fought back and got it overturned in the U.S. Supreme Court, in part because the rules limiting lawyer speech were vague. There was a safe harbor provision in the rule against pretrial publicity in Nevada that said a lawyer can rebut hostile publicity that was not of his own making on behalf of his client. So I think Trump's lawyers, there'll be limits placed on them. They'll have some limited ability to fight back. But here's the question. Can the court limit a person who didn't pick the fight? Can a court limit a litigant's right to fight back against a prosecution that he thinks is unjust? And in this case in particular, can the court silence a person running for public office who has been charged with a crime? This is a First Amendment issue of first impression, I think, and this will likely, it could end up before the United States Supreme Court fairly quickly, because what we have is a man running for president charged with crimes, and we'll see what they are, whether those crimes are ludicrous on their face or not. A court invoking its inherent supervisory authority to say you can't talk about it, but the accused is running for president. That's just a mind-blowing fact pattern. So my prediction is that in the end, Merchan might be too smart to impose a gag order, because you don't want to pick a fight you can't win, especially if you're invoking the inherent supervisory power of the court. I expect that Bragg will make a move in the direction of seeking a gag order. Merchan will probably take it under advisement and see what Trump does. When Trump goes on the attack and speaks out, New York may move for imposition of a gag order against Trump, and then the issue will be framed. In other words, at that point, the judge will have a narrow issue to decide. And if Trump is smart, he'll fight back on First Amendment grounds and seek to get this case to the United States Supreme Court as quickly as possible. Now, question, can all that take place during a presidential campaign and be decided in an efficacious manner such that it doesn't undermine the campaign? And the answer is probably not. I mean, here we are in almost, in the late, in early spring of 2023. Believe it or not, elections are just around the corner, November 2024, and it takes time to file briefs. It takes time to get a court to hear them. You have to get courts to agree to hear things on an expedited basis, and that's not easy. And so, I'm hoping that Trump has lawyers thinking about these First Amendment issues, how to fight the gag order, how to get quick and expedited review. Let's game this out a step further, though. Suppose Merchan is baited into imposing a gag order, and suppose he does, and suppose Trump disobeys it. Does the court then say, well, you're running for president, you can disobey my order? Or would Trump be required to obey the order? And if he chose not to do it, what sanction would Merchan impose? He could impose initially financial sanctions, but there's also something called criminal contempt that could put a person behind bars. So if it's hard for me to believe, and in fact, I do not believe, that this drama will unfold in such a way that Donald Trump is imprisoned for speaking out against what he regards as an unjust prosecution. I don't believe that could happen, but reality is such that it could. And a lot's going to depend on the rulings that Judge Merchan makes, and how Trump responds to them. So it's going to be dramatic. It's going to be dramatic.
Well, I think dramatic on purpose, I think, from the Trump perspective, because I do believe personally that there is a lot of political hay to be made by and through this. What you were talking about at the beginning of our stream, when I was asking about, the inclusion of the Secret Service, et cetera, I think that he is going to use this as sort of an organic method of showing what his platform is about in 2024. Right? Whether he ever gets a chance to make it. But I do think that this is, he has extreme leverage, in my opinion, if he's able to use it well. I think that his attorneys are going to be the ones that are driving everything. They're going to tell him what moves to make, what not to say specifically. He'll probably not listen to them 67% of the time, right? And so they'll have that other third that they can, impose upon him. But, again, this is one of four. I've said this probably 10 times now. This Manhattan Alvin Bragg DA issue is one of four that Trump is going to have to fight in the oncoming election season. We have no idea when any of the classified documents, information that stem from the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago, when that's going to come to bear. We still don't know when or if any of the stuff going on in Georgia with the allegations of Trump using his influence improperly for them trying to get them to relook at vote counts. And then we also don't know what is going to go on, if anything, with the January 6th investigation and his involvement in what took place at the Capitol.
I'm embarrassed to say this, Mike. I don't even know really who's in charge of Trump's legal strategy. I mean, I see a dizzying.
We are.
We should be. But I see a dizzying number of lawyers' names appearing through the newspaper. He's got a former president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers down in Atlanta quarterbacking some things. He's got Joe Tacopino apparently in New York, prepared to appear from him. I see Harmeet Dillon talking about it as though she's got some inside leverage. But what Donald needs right now is one lawyer to be in charge of how he crafts his legal defense in light of his presidential run. And I'm telling you, Team Donald, you better get your writs ready, and you better get your briefs ready on fighting the gag order. And, we'll be and you can look in the Connecticut Supreme Court for the filings in state of Connecticut versus Fotis Doulos et al. For some guidance. I wanted to pay attention to a question that Camera Time asked. Camera Time, welcome. I don't recall seeing your name on other streams. Welcome to Law and Legitimacy, where we promise to make America think again. Our objective here isn't to press a partisan perspective, but simply to spot out issues and give you options about how to think about them. Our commitment is to engage in what we hope is civil discourse with an aim of showing a way out of the partisan divides that are crippling the country right now. So you ask, are any of the Proud Boys planning on showing support for Trump Tuesday? Well, not any that I'm representing because they're locked up. And, the Proud Boys as an organization, as an entity, I think are in crisis right now. A little reported story this week was that the African Methodist Episcopal Church in D.C. has got a default judgment against several of them and is seeking $22 million in punitive damages against the entity for burning a Black Lives Matter flag back in 2020. Nobody has yet sued BLM for the mostly peaceful barbecues to which many urban Americans were invited in 2020, but that's a different story. I think that there's tension between the Proud Boys and as individuals and the president. These were people who believed in him. These were people who bought the rhetoric of stopping the steal. These were people, some of them, who responded to the president's call to be there and be wild on January 6, 2021. And when a riot ensued and things broke out, many hundreds of Americans, maybe now more than 1,000, as many as 2,000 in the end, will be or have been arrested for their participation in that riot. And all that Donald Trump has really done to show support for them thus far is participate in a video that involves the singing of the national anthem and Trump's recital of the Pledge of Allegiance. He's done too little, too late. And at least as the lawyer for one Proud Boy, I feel that Trump used these people and then walked away from him when it was convenient. So I don't expect the Proud Boys to be bleeding red, white, and blue for the Donald.
Well, and that's why I put the Washington Examiner article in the background here for us to discuss. Marjorie Taylor Greene made headlines late last week talking about how, she and whatever coalition she can pull together will be there in New York to protest the indictment of Donald Trump. And I don't necessarily understand why. I don't know that I guess let me rephrase. This is an improper method of doing what those on the political right, in my opinion, should be doing. The message from the political right should be that all eyes are on the court and the trial should be fair, right? And any of the feedback, any of the reporting, which there will be plenty. We're not going to be deprived of information flowing from this court. And so from my perspective, this feels off, Norm. The MTG saying that she wants to go to New York and protest the indictment. The indictment is the indictment. We're already there. We don't know what's in it, but it's there. The time for all of this has come and gone. So I don't know if somebody gave MTG a bunch of stupid pills in the last 6 months, because I can't.
That's 6 months? No, I think about the time she was bathing with, using that QAnon skin gel in her tongue. I think the stupid ointment took effect then. I mean, MTG is an angry populist woman. Okay,
yeah,
great.
But she at one point did have her fingers on the pulse of the populist movement, the MAGA movement. She now seems to be, ever since she started getting in league with Speaker McCarthy during, when they were trying to confirm McCarthy as speaker, and Matt Gaetz was calling McCarthy out for these various things. All of a sudden you saw this weird departure, as if MTG had been subsumed by the plurality of the swamp that we thought that she was immune to. And that's why I call it stupid pills. This is like a day late and a dollar short. Oh, we're going to go there and protest. No. Organize to make sure that the people who are in your coalition understand what the legal parameters and obligations are, and perhaps just make it a prerogative to ensure that the political right says to the New York judiciary that we are not going to allow this to be an unfair trial, right?
Well, that's a great point. But I think Justin's got a good point, referring to MTG. She's the rights AOC. I mean, here's the deal. Would you pay on a pay-per-view channel to see Marjorie Taylor Greene square off against AOC in a mud wrestling contest? I might. I think, that might be fun, because
put them in the octagon.
The two of them probably deserve one another and are why we have this podcast, because a lot of what they say is just noise that doesn't contribute to the discussion. I worry a little bit about the call for protests as to the arrest of Donald Trump. Because I think it's a direct appeal to the streets, and it's a direct appeal almost to submerged violence. The whole point of legitimacy and a discussion of legitimacy is to what?
Camera time says only if Jerry Springer was.
I think our discussion
I'll
of
vote Steve Harvey on this one.
yeah, Steve Harvey would be good, or maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger. I want the two of you to work out your disagreements in a principled manner, and the principle is violence, violence. But the protests of the arrest, people have a right to be angry about it, and if they want to protest it, I guess that's fine. I worry a little bit about the effect of the J6 prosecution on the right to assemble. And I wonder whether people are going to be fearful to appear at these rallies for fear that they will be arrested as the J6ers were. And you'll say, well, wait. The J6ers, those who've been arrested, they entered Capitol grounds, they entered the buildings, they disrupted the electoral count, and that was a profoundly delegitimizing event. And therefore, they can't complain too much about being arrested because their conduct crossed a certain line. Well, maybe it crossed a certain line, but maybe that line isn't quite as bad as the government's made it out to be, because the people who were present in D.C. on J6 spoke out, they assembled, and they assembled with the right to petition for redress of grievances. Then a riot broke out, and they reacted. Those charged had their words used against them, their protected speech. The government has trawled through their social media accounts and used the words they uttered about their desire to protest as proof of an intent to use violence that day. They were present when a riot broke out, and their presence at that scene made them suspects. If they crossed a line, it made them guilty. And so will people fear to come out to protest now for fear that if the person standing next to them does something wrong, they'll be accused of being a co-conspirator, or they'll be accused of having incited violence?
Which is, look at camera time. Imagine the surveillance on Tuesday. The FBI will know who is there in detail. It's another reason that we talked about early on with the lack of presence when the original announcement of a forthcoming indictment, before anything had been confirmed through a grand jury vote. Right, there was a protest outside of I don't know if it was Trump's Tower or where it was in New York, but it was a paltry showing. Right, not very many people showed up, and isn't that the essence of what Trump is kind of having to contend with right now when he makes any sort of overtures or calls for people to?
Well, it's not Trump, it's us, and that's the thing that's so disturbing. I mean, one of the things that has rocked me in my experience representing the Proud Boys is the extent of FBI surveillance and infiltration of dissent groups. This time, groups on the right. The FBI maintains a complex system of registering, monitoring, and using what they refer to as confidential human sources. In the Proud Boys case, when we've litigated issues about the use of these sources, the court has been sealed from the public. I don't know where the First Amendment advocacy groups were to complain about that, but what we've learned, and I'm under court order not to disclose the particulars, but what we do know, and I think what made its way onto the record, is that the FBI has a complex network of confidential human sources whom they pay and who have handlers. And these handlers are people who assign CHS's tasks and ask CHSs to find out information. A CHS will report to a handler. All this information is kept in a secret data bank, as it were, in the FBI, and it's not shared with line prosecutors, day-to-day prosecutors, or law enforcement investigators, unless...
And just to make sure people heard you, line, L-I-N-E, not lying.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. I'm mumbling a little bit. But, if you want to gain access to that, you've got to persuade some gatekeeper that there's good cause for that. And the FBI maintains it does this because it wants to respect the associational rights of individual Americans. It does this, I would submit, in part because of the activities of the Church Committee in the 1970s, which, to the surprise of many Americans, disclosed that the FBI was actively involved in trying to disrupt the left, in trying to disrupt Martin Luther King, spreading lies about him. And so limits were placed on law enforcement to respect our rights to associate and even to engage in violent speech. The United States Supreme Court in the Brandenburg decision, basically says the abstract calls for violence at some future date are protected speech. And there is a famous case involving a communist who once said to an individual, "Come the revolution, it's people like you who are going to get lined up against the wall and shot." And so the person was arrested. The United States Supreme Court overturned the conviction and basically said that that's protected speech. So now we have a deeply divided country. We are a people of the book, whether that book be the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bible. We take words seriously. We take words seriously in this spiritual and emotional wilderness, which we call our culture, and we seek to provide guidance, find guidance for our lives in them. People are going to say, we the people have a right to appear. We the people, have a right to protest. We can petition for redress of grievances. We need to throw the bum out. We should, and then the language is going to get more and more overheated. Tar and feather him. There was an occasion in the United States where politicians were tarred and feathered. Now to even talk about it puts you on an FBI radar. And so there is a committee in Congress right now that is focusing on weaponization of the government. To my knowledge, this issue, what's the FBI doing with confidential human sources as it surveils domestic groups, has not been addressed, and it needs to be addressed. And Manhattan, what's going to be happening in Manhattan this week, perhaps at Mar-a-Lago and other places, is going to be an example of people being afraid to protest for fear of what their government will do. It's funny, Mike, I'm sorry, I'm on a rant this morning.
I love it.
In the Proud Boys trial, much was made of some language that some of the Proud Boys exchanged with one another via text message. When the people are afraid of government, there is tyranny. When government's afraid of liberty, there is freedom. And, ooh, look at this. You want government to be afraid. Oh my God, you must be a terrorist. You know whose words those are? Thomas Jefferson. And so, we are a people of the book. We say that we've created a government to serve our ends. Jefferson once said a little bit of revolution every now and then, every generation was probably a good thing. Jefferson also said something else that's terrifying to really think about in a literal way, and that is that the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed with the bloods of tyrants and patriots from time to time. That's horrible. If you actually think about bloodshed in the service of political ideas, that's not a place to which I want to go. But it's the place that this country was born in. And so, Donald Trump's arrest, he's been arrested by lawful process. The indictment will be unsealed on Tuesday or whenever he's presented in court. And then the public will have a right to see and know, as will Donald Trump's lawyers, what he's been charged with and why. And then there will be a legal battle over whether the indictment was improperly obtained, whether there was grand jury misconduct, whether there is reason to believe that there can be proof beyond a reasonable doubt to convict him, whether the evidence is sufficient, to support the charges. All the traditional tools at this disposal of a criminal defense lawyer will be on display in a courtroom, in a public trial, where we, the people, will be able to watch and observe that trial and determine for ourselves whether justice is being done. The notion that on a pretrial basis we're going to be suppressed and terrified into not registering opinions is, to me, chilling. Now, it's also irresponsible for Marjorie Taylor Greene to say, let's go to Manhattan and tear the buildings down, rhetorically speaking, because this indictment is unjust. We just don't know that.
It's an unwinnable landscape, right? Urban landscapes are not a winnable landscape from my perspective for conservatives in 2023, right? What we saw in the summer of 2020 was that there was a preferred activist group that was able to do tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in damage across the United States, across every major city and municipality in the United States. And we also saw that those activists, by and large, cover their faces and they are organized and they use tactics that should be understood. Part of the problem with the Proud Boys, without getting into too much of the merits of the J6 trials, was that they were having to reestablish what their protocols were for even showing up for certain protests, right? To show up at these events that they were looking to, I guess, use as opportunities to secure those on the political right that wanted to show up to either counter protest or whatever. right? There were stabbings. They were having to use stab-proof vests, all sorts of stuff that's been going on. Marjorie Taylor Greene asking conservatives to go into an urban environment like New York City is political malpractice, not just stupid pills. It's political malpractice. She will get people killed, Norm.
Well, and if that happens, then what happens next? I mean, the 2024 election season, we predicted when we started this podcast, would be among the more violent sociological events in the United States in probably since the 1960s and 1970s. And I think what it's going to do is it's going to draw a lot of venom out of people. And so if you're Marjorie Taylor Greene and you bring people into New York and they protest and they're attacked and they fight back, we're one step closer to dissolution, which is where a lot of people want us to go. So, and it may be, Mike, that it's inevitable that we get there, because I would rather appear on the streets and petition and protest than be too afraid to do so.
I agree. I just don't see on short notice, right? Given the nature of things as they currently sit, that's just is asking to be flanked in a way that most people wouldn't even be expecting.
Well, let's see what happens. It's going to be an interesting week in Manhattan. Are you going to go up there? Are you going to go to the protests?
Yeah, as if if any of my clients are watching this, no, I'll be here serving your interests like I do every day.
And I will be in court in days 62, 63 et al. Of the Proud Boys trial, where we're hoping to rest both sides either this week or early next week and go to closing arguments shortly after Easter. I want to raise an issue that Camera Time raises. The primary goal of this indictment is Trump will not be able to run for president. After that, he will be a big influencer in the election. I think you're wrong, Camera Time. I think that he will run for election. I think that he will use this indictment as a platform, and he will get in 2023 what the media determined to deny him, and that is a big platform for free. This arrest will become primetime news and will provide him with the ultimate platform from which he can preach whatever it is he's going to preach. And therein lies the drama, because while the case is going to be captioned, people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump, it's really going to be Juan Merchan versus Donald Trump.
Yeah, and BTL says Thomas Jefferson is basically on trial.
Yeah, well, that really is the case. So I think we've talked the ear off of that.
Well, one thing I wanted to bring up, I told BTL to sit tight because BTL has been in our Rumble chat, throwing a lot of good stuff here. BTL first says, this whole thing is mind-blowing. We don't know exactly what is coming, so we have to wait. It sure seems like these high-profile cases seem to be getting their target quite a bit lately, right? Hitting their target quite a bit lately. And then this is what I really wanted to focus on, and this may be a transition to an article that you sent me earlier today, Norm, that I read. BTL says, it does not feel like there is much momentum on the right/conservative side to get anything done. And this may be a good time to perhaps address the Substack from none other than Mike Cernovich, titled "The Regime Lacks Legitimacy. Maybe Raw Power is All It Needs." Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
I'll bring this up on the screen for us, and maybe it'll prompt a little bit. But I think that what I read in BTL's comment is that morale is extremely low. And from where I'm sitting, I think that is likely on purpose. I don't think that there's any game other than complete demoralization being played by the current presidential administration, by the Biden administration. And you can see that at almost every level and every vector, especially in the wake of the shooting last week in Nashville, right?
Well, I am really confused by the Nashville shooting. And then maybe this is the place to pivot, because and lack of trust in the mainstream media. But I just don't know what to make of the sudden fascination, the sudden infatuation with transgender rights. I mean, gender dysphoria has been a thing as long as there has been a diagnostic and statistical manual used by psychiatrists to diagnose disorders. And now suddenly, almost as predicted, it has become the cause du jour. I suspect soon we'll have a in fact, I'm surprised we have not yet seen the Trans Lives Matter meme flourish. And I suspect the reason for that is they don't want to be accused of offending the Black Lives Matter movement. That somehow Black Lives Matter is a sacrosanct mean, and it means to focus on the unique and historic discrimination that people of color have suffered in the United States. And so and when you say white lives matter, you're accused suddenly of being a racist, because equality before the law isn't enough. A privileged position at law is what BLM seeks. And it began with a plea for recognition as equals. It's now become sort of a claim of moral superiority. And thus, in order to achieve equality, we now need a privileged position. You must take account of your microaggressions. You must check your privilege. You must pay us reparations. And someday in the distant future, we'll be able to stand as equals. But until then, get to the back of the line, white guy. I've suffered historic injustice. And I don't think that the trans movement wants to step on that. Although arguably they would have a longer claim, because if the trans movement means anything, presumably it means that somehow gender identity is fluid, and historically for millennia, a certain group of people who are born one thing and decide to become another have not been given their due course or due position or due regard in society, and that might even predate slavery in Western institutions. But how is it, Mike? How is it that have we become so numb to school shootings that when 3 school children
and we don't give a damn
adults
about
are shot
the people that die? Yeah, that we don't give a damn about the people that die. Perhaps
all we can talk about is trans rights. How did that? No pun intended. This is a bad reference to Nietzsche for those of you who read this stuff. How did that transvaluation of values occur? I mean, how did that happen? This
transmutation of sorts. I don't know, Norm, but I do know that there is something inconvenient about the demographic of the perpetrator, right? The one that went in there with firearms and unleashed hell on young children. The school itself doesn't have children that are any older than, I believe, 6th grade.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're not talking about even high school age kids or anything. I mean, this was, and I believe the shooter actually attended that school. I don't know if you.
Right. And apparently I'm even like, I'm now at a point where in all this, I don't even know what pronouns to use. This person was born a male, identifies as a female, and now if you don't give them gender recognition, you're engaged in some huge civil rights violation. So, and if you refer to it, you're not really respecting them. If you refer to she, you're doing violence to nature. If you refer to he, you're being insensitive. Candidly, I don't give a shit. If you're born with a dick and you decide you need to wear high heels and makeup, knock yourself out. But do you really need to dance in front of my children and say, isn't this wonderful? I mean, where does that come from? What is going on?
Well, and Mark Randazza, friend of the podcast, friend of both of ours in the professional realm as well, I think he had a tweet, something to the effect, and he said this more than one occasion, but his rule is simply this, because he has the same sensibility around, it's your world to a certain extent. If one is born and you don't identify with whatever your anatomy tells you to identify with, whatever. But here's the question: if certain behavior would not be endorsed by the public or whomever, if it were just a cisgendered woman, right, scantily clad, dancing.
What is cisgendered? I mean, if you're born a woman, do we have to engage in this constipated vocabulary? If you were born a woman. Okay, can we just say that?
If you're a woman that identifies as a woman, would you be allowed to dance around in underwear in front of young children under normal circumstances? And if not, why is it okay for someone who just says that I'm not actually a woman, so it's okay?
Well, that's the move that has become fatal in identity politics, and that is claiming the mantle of the oppressed gives you special privileges to do things the rest of us won't and don't. And the rest of us are supposed to sit back and say, "Isn't that great that you're supposed to be able to misbehave in the act of consciousness raising?" Thus, a drag queen can engage in a salacious performance in front of 6-year-olds, and a BLM activist can burn a building and engage in arson. And the rest of us are just supposed to sit back and say, well, I guess it's time for them to have their recognition. No, it's not. I mean, it's the very notion of sin in Augustine, who I return to again and again and again and again. The very notion of sin says sin is love of the wrong thing. And the sin of pride is placing yourself and your desires and your needs at the center of the world and demanding that the world bend a knee to you. And the whole point of the pot protesting to the potter, why makest me thus? I think this comes from the prophet Isaiah, is to say that, we are creatures created in the image of God, and all of us sin and do sin and have shortcomings, and all of us stand in need of grace. Not one of us has the right to demand of the world that they recognize us on the terms of our choosing. That's a form of idolatry. And I think that the guys at the Daily Wire have kind of gone off the rails. I listened to them for a while. They've become somewhat strident, and I've become less interested in them over time. But I did notice in my news feed this week, they're talking about a collapse of civilization, and I have to agree with them. I saw something on Twitter this morning that just blew me away.
But what is anybody at the Daily Wire going to do about it? I mean, these guys have amassed an extreme amount of resources. They have massive influence. They're doing all this stuff, and yet it just seems as though the likes of, what is even his name?
Matt Walsh.
No, not Matt Walsh.
Ben Shapiro.
Yes. What is he even saying? I mean, this guy has the mantle to do something about it, because we talk about culture. Our culture is in the toilet. And so what has the Daily Wire done, or what are they doing, right, to follow through on what Matt Walsh has brought to their gates? Are they going to do anything or just watch?
Well, they're doing more than we're doing. I mean, they have
and
created.
They should be, because they've got an order of magnitude more resources than you and I have, and eyeballs, etc. Right?
Well, let me put this question to you then, Mike. What do you think they should be doing?
I think that they should be a little. Let's see. I want to choose my words here very carefully.
Why?
The Daily Wire plays the middle, right? It seems right now, if anybody the Daily Wire is watching, fine, whatever. Or anybody that patronizes the Daily Wire with their own money, whatever. I used to listen to Ben Shapiro on a daily basis, and I very, 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 very quickly outgrew it, because there's no nutrition to that diet. It seems as though he has his stances on the U.S. and Israel dynamic, right? And that is unassailable. There's no room to debate anything about that. That's priority number 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a lot of talk about culture, right? Counter programming, the excesses of the political left and Hollywood, this, that, and the third. But the only one that's actually doing that is Matt Walsh. So I'm not sure that Matt Walsh is in the right position. If anything, it seems like Matt Walsh should have been the Steven Crowder of the last several months, right? He is in a better position. He has the right attributes, right, and the right instincts to be talking about this. So if the question is, what should they be doing? Well, it should be recognizing that you're not going to play the middle forever, right?
Okay, let me ask a different question. What should we be doing? Because isn't the point of Law and Legitimacy to engage in a set of discussions and to engage in discourse that helps us find a way out of this polarized wilderness? So, what should we be doing, Mike? What's the one thing that you think a listener should do today to help build a momentum that checks the madness in the world all around us?
Well, what we as Law and Legitimacy should be doing is...
No. What should our listeners be doing?
Oh, our listeners be doing.
And you and I be doing.
Getting involved as much as you can, or as much as you're willing to, in where you live locally. Knowing your neighbors. If you have the resources available, investing in property, right? Building other businesses, creating force multipliers, finding people that share your values. It's just organizing at an organic level, right? If your day-to-day life does not reflect your own personal values, it's incumbent upon you to fix that, right? And I'm not saying to do anything crazy at all, right? This is just, can you, as much as possible, make your day-to-day life be a consistent version of what you think and what the material that you're consuming. Whatever brought you to Law and Legitimacy was probably a pretty honest call, right? Whatever brought you to
become the neighbor you wish you had.
Absolutely, 100%. 100%.
It's funny you should say that, because I remember, during the pandemic, I had a lot of time to walk around my neighborhood. I'd walk, 2, 3 hours a day with my dog. I'd like to say I walked her paws off. I walked so much I got my border collie tired. And those of you who know dogs know that takes some doing. And I realized how little I knew about my neighbors in my neighborhood. And then I saw, up the road there was somebody who was experimenting with small scale farming, and he began to sell vegetables, in season. And then he started to raise chickens and he sold eggs. And so I made it a point to buy produce from him. And we make it a point, my wife and I, when we can, to buy locally, on the theory that we want to support our community. It didn't take me all that far, candidly, but I felt that the development of a handshake economy was a good start, because I think the problem with the internet is it's easy to spout off and be provocative and throw Molotov cocktails. It's hard to live it's hard to live next to the house you've just set on fire. And so I think norms of civility and honest engagement with your neighbors are important. Justin from Connecticut says, most of my neighbors here in Connecticut are lost. Well, Justin, here's the challenge. How are you going to help them find themselves? Are you going to do so by scorning them? No. You'll simply alienate them and drive a sense of division into your community. Are you going to do that by modeling norms of citizenship that you wish they would find attractive? And I would say, yeah, I'd say there is something appealing about a wholesome life. And I mean, you look to the ancients, you look to Cicero and his discussion of morality, you look to Aristotle's ethics, you look to Augustine, you look to the great sources of civil discourse, read them, and then try to model them in your interactions with others. The very term society is from the Latin root of the word that means friends. And in a society, we become friends to one another because we share common norms and a common vision of the good. And if our neighbors disagree with us, I think in the internet era, we have a tendency to retreat to our silos and say, fuck you, and refuse to engage. And that creates deeper divisions. And that's suicidal. The fact of the matter is, there's not a person listening to this podcast who's self-sufficient. Much though we all pretend to be preppers, this, that, and the other thing. When I need a new radio, I go to the store to buy one. When I need a battery for it, I go to the store to buy one. I don't prepare most of my own food. I don't grow most of my own food. These are fantasies. The little house we all want to live in the little house on the prairie. But the fact is, we all live in communities that are interlocking webs of connections, one between another. And we've got to learn to talk to one another, which means we've got to learn to tolerate one another, and we've got to learn to listen to one another. And we have to learn to speak in a way that makes it possible for others to listen to us. And I fail at that every single day.
I think
every single day.
A practical shortcoming of that right now, just as a temporal matter, Norm, is that the opposition is resolute and collectivized and much more voracious in their appetite for conflict, right? And they seem to have earmuffs on when it comes to this stuff. I mean, a lot of what you're saying, I wholeheartedly agree with. The problem is right now that if that were the methodology of digging America out of this impasse that we seem to have reached, that would have been done long ago, because I do think that in general, civilized people who need the predictability of their ride to work in the morning, they need the predictability of their income, they need the predictability of the holidays and where they'll spend them, they need the predictability of food on the shelves at grocery stores. We are conflict averse, right? We want to, as much as possible, avoid conflict. What appears in front of us right now, however, seems to be an immovable sense that there is going to be conflict, right? And I think that what I'm saying, and I want to refer to the Rumble stream again, BTL says Shapiro is a businessman making money. I don't think he wants to compromise. He does want to make money off of it, though. And Tuesday says as well, Daily Wire happily plays big tech enforcer too. I'm vastly more encouraged by people listening to and sharing the various law podcasts and streams than pundits speak. So I think if I can be clear about what I would suggest to anybody is that find it within yourself to not be pushed over, right? Be able to stand up, shoulders back, chest out, and not show fear or predisposition to avoid conflict. in these one-on-one scenarios. And that's not an invitation for one to be aggressive or to go and seek conflict, but it is en masse a recognition that we are all worthy of the same dignity that we are demanding through a lot of these contrasts with sort of the protests coming out of Nashville and whatever else, right? It seems like an obvious indignity to normal law-abiding people that words would be shoved in our mouth, that we hold opinions that we actually don't, right? And so I think it's really important for people to just know that it's okay to disagree with people, but also to make it known to people that you disagree with them at the right point, and to not suffer fools. Stop
Yeah.
suffering fools.
Well, so I did that this week. There's a crisis going in Connecticut brewing that we didn't talk a lot about it this week, but in the Connecticut Public Defender Services Commission, Connecticut boasts that it's the first state with public defenders, with institutional public defenders. That is, lawyers who represent indigents in conflicts with the government, criminal conflicts at little or no cost to them. And we're tearing the Public Defender Commission in Connecticut apart right now. About 2 years ago, the commission appointed its first Black woman, a woman named Tayshaun Bowden-Lewis.
Wait, no, it's not even 2 years ago. It's just one. It
Okay.
was last August or July.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that
all
fast.
of this has happened within like 6 months.
So she's appointed, and there's much celebration. She's going to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into this regime, and so she wants to remake the image in terms of her own ideals. And she's Black, if I didn't mention. And the commission is overseen by 7 commissioners. They are her bosses. She is the chief administrative officer. They are her bosses. So it comes time to fill various positions within the public defender's office, and she does. The commission does. She recommends candidates who happen to be Black. The commission overrules her in one or more instances and places people in positions who they believe are better qualified. It's their right to make those decisions. It's her right to make her recommendations. It's not her right to respond to the rejection of her recommendations in the manner she did, which is accusing the commissioners of racism. So one commission spot was vacant, and I believe 5 of the commissioners resigned recently because they just couldn't take the internal conflict.
I think four.
No, 5. I learned of another one yesterday.
Oh, wow. Okay,
that
5
hadn't been reported, and then 1 remained. The only Black commissioner, a former state representative named Bill Dyson. So now there's a crisis in Connecticut. We have a Black chief public defender who you can't disagree with, or you're going to be called a racist. We have a leaderless commission because the white folks on it got tired of being smeared for doing their job, and they didn't dare fire her because she'd written them a letter saying, you're micromanaging me in the name of racism. So now we've got a leaderless public defenders commission, a chief public defender whose agency is crumbling around her. Morale is said to be very low. There are significant internal divisions. The governor has asked for a former Supreme Court Justice, Richard N. Palmer, to step in and do some sort of inquiry. The Attorney General's office is paying $425 an hour to an outside law firm to investigate what in the world is going on. Tayshaun Bowden-Lewis has lawyered up and is saber rattling. The former a human rights director, human resources director, has quit because she feared that she's claiming a hostile work environment.
Well, and her letter is detailed. We should probably cover that letter tomorrow, Norm, if you've read that. But she details like 4 or 5 different topics before her resignation.
So so the whole thing is ground to a halt. And here's the simple answer. Why not just fire Tayshaun Bowden-Lewis? I mean, we've got 7 commissioners who have been run out of, whose responsibility it is to oversee this historic agency, which does good for thousands of Connecticut residents, many of whom are minorities, and they're afraid of this racial bullying that's going on by the chief public defender, so they're quitting. And somehow that seems so emblematic of our times. We've got this new sense of racial entitlement, this sense of racial favoritism, and how dare you second guess the woman of color ahead of the ship? By doing so, you must be a racist. This case has become a farcical textbook of what's wrong with identity politics. When it all becomes about race and you lose any sense of collective norms or any sense of collective sense of excellence, when you lose the ability to disagree without having your identity called into question, you've lost something fundamental. And, Governor, Mr. Ned, the Ned Lamont, the governor of Connecticut, he shouldn't be pussyfooting around about this. They should just can her. Now, Camera Time says, who has the authority to fire her? I don't know that anybody does right now.
Well, yeah, it was the members of the oversight board that resigned en masse.
But they quit. And so now, you've heard, this is going to be an offensive metaphor, but I'm going to use it deliberately. We got the slaves running the plantation or the lunatics running the asylum. We've got this woman with a racial sense of entitlement scaring off her bosses, and now she's going to be in charge until something else happens. I don't know if the governor has the ability to fire her in the absence of a quorum on the commission. I'm sure that that's being looked at, but not too hard. Because I don't believe Ned Lamont's going to want to be accused of a racist any more than the commissioners did.
Certainly
not. And so we've come to the point of absurdity. We've come to a point where normal personnel decisions cannot be made in the context of an ongoing entity because of claims of racism. And the result is that somehow an agency is ground to a standstill because there are significant questions about how the agency will function, even with respect to ongoing expenditures, approval of experts in ongoing criminal cases, and the very people who Connecticut prided itself on serving, that is the underprivileged, the people who are in need of a public defender, are now going to be poorly served because this agency has been made a hostage to the poisonous racial politics of our time. So I am calling on Tayshaun Bowden-Lewis, whom I've met and probably talked to in elevators. She came up through the public defender system in Waterbury. Step down, Tayshaun. If you want to be a racial activist, go get a job at the Yale Law School. And I'm serious about that. I'm sure they'd hire you, and you could give a symposium upon your arrival at Yale. And that symposium will be confronting racism in institutions. The problem is your speech will largely be ironic because, as far as I'm concerned, one of the primary purveyors of racism in the public defender's office right now is Tayshaun Lewis Bowden, and she's got to go. It's interesting that the controversy that this extreme form of racial preferences embodies in the Connecticut public defender system comes a matter of mere months before the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to issue two decisions on the use of affirmative actions, one arising out of the public universities in North Carolina, the second in private institutions at Harvard. And the court may well walk away from affirmative action. There is dicta in the affirmative action cases in the school context that says, maybe another 20, 25 years of this, and it won't be necessary any longer. Those words were written, I think, by John Roberts in the Seattle school case about 20, 25 years ago. And it might not have been Roberts. I may be wrong about that. But the point is, perhaps the time has come to put aside racial preferences. But the overheated rhetoric of our time makes it sound more urgent than ever. As things get better, the demands become greater. And the result is that for most of us looking at this from afar, our support of it becomes impossible because we've got struggles of our own. And we started this discussion by talking about the rise of trans activism and its domination of the airwaves this week in the wake of the Nashville shooting. I mean, did you know this week was the first time in Connecticut state history that a trans flag flew over the state capitol? I mean, how did that happen? And for those of us who are struggling to pay our own bills, for those of us in the non-privileged section of society who are expected to check our privilege, watch our microaggressions, it's just a bit much. And so the notion that I'm supposed to care each and every day in ways that matter and are significant to those who are making a new claim on my regard, my respect, and my need to repair the damage that time has done to them, I'm simply exhausted by them. And the politics that I look for is it's probably the politics that Vivek Ramaswamy is talking about. He's not yet achieved star status in the Republican pursuit of the primary, but he might. And he's talking about politics that unify. about bridges that we can build rather than canals that we can, or channels that we need to defend against one another. And I don't know if we can find our way back to that kind of talk.
Well, I do think we can. One thing that I want to address really quickly, Justin Carter says this hurts urban communities most. I think the big takeaway, the big proposition that I lean into when it comes to the affirmative action stuff, and not the traditional level of affirmative action that I think I grew up sort of understanding just as a young person. We're talking about this within the context of the Connecticut Public Defender's Office. In 2023, in the modern era, these efforts manifest as sort of a willingness to destroy the institution itself.
Mm.
It is just a complacency with the fact that by any means necessary, even if that means that the institution's core function will be completely frustrated, that doesn't matter. All that matters is that we get it right on paper, and right being a subjective correct, right?
Yeah. Well, here's another take on what I think's going on. We're going to pivot hard, Mike. Buckle your seatbelt. I think there's a Chat GPT 5 within months of being disclosed. And here is the significant tell on that. Sam Altman was interviewed by Lex Friedman, I guess a week ago, about OpenAI's Chat GPT 4. And one of the things he said in the interview is that GPT-4's capabilities have surprised him and some of its developers. It can do a little more than they expected, and they're not sure how it does it. And okay, well, that's great. Artificial intelligence is dawning in this brave new world, and it's going to have a transformational effect on our civilization. Henry Kissinger and several colleagues recently wrote a book in which they said AI will be to world history what the printing press was, a transformational event that somehow revolutionizes and alters our fundamental relations, not just with one another, but with ourselves. As we come to trust machines that we don't fully understand, we'll be taking a leap of faith into a world that we haven't inhabited in a long time, because the promise of the Enlightenment was sapere audere, dare to know, Kant said, in his essay, What is Enlightenment? So we challenged ourselves to set aside old orthodoxies. We set aside assumptions. We challenged everything, and we sought to break things into pieces so that we understood how they worked and we could replicate them. Okay, worked pretty well. We got cars, refrigerators, and the kind of microphone you see there on Mike's gizmo. And here we are communicating with one another over a technology that most of us don't understand. That's great. But what does AI do? With neural networks, quantum computing, and whatnot, we are now getting responses to inquiries we make, imperatives, directions we should follow, from machines whose processes are opaque. We don't understand where the stuff we are using comes from, but we're relying on it. We're developing a sense of reliance or trust in the technology, and that may or may not be good for us. It certainly is inconsistent with the ethos of the Enlightenment. So this week, Altman talked about the recent release of OpenAI's GPT-4. I tried to get into it the other day to screw around with it. I could only get access to GPT 3.5. And it is interesting. You can ask it questions. It's like doing a Google search. It's like Google with a vocabulary. You type something into Google and you'll get a list of articles. You can ask ChatGPT questions and it'll provide you with answers. But here's something interesting. As I was screwing around with ChatGPT, I started asking it questions about one of the things I know best about myself. And I found that it was wrong a significant number of times. In a follow-up inquiry into something, it gave me a law degree 9 years earlier than in fact I had earned one. And I wondered, how did this machine come to that conclusion when it is patently wrong as a matter of historic fact? But yet, those of us who rely on ChatGPT and on artificial intelligence presuming know-it-all-ness might take that as a fact. And I suspect for many people who would do a comparable search, they'd now accept that information. And when I said, no, it's not true, they will say something like, but ChatGPT said so. And suddenly the locus of authority over ourselves, our histories, our narratives becomes something other than ourselves. And it does so as a result of a machine to which we are all drawn. And the algorithm is secret. It can't be known. Obviously, it's proprietary. And even if it were open source, what Kissinger told us is we don't fully understand how these things work. Well, this week, there was an astounding letter that was written, that was published to the world about 1,000 AI researchers asking for a moratorium
Yeah,
on development.
including Elon Musk and including one of Apple's co-founders,
But who was not included?
Sam Altman.
And why do you think he wasn't included?
Because he's already been doing what the letter was calling for a moratorium on.
I think that Altman's deletion was not inadvertent. I think that when Altman talked about the developments in ChatGPT on Lex Friedman's show, he was giving us an insight into the future. And I think the timing of this letter right now by people close to the AI industry suggests that they know what the rest of us don't yet. And that is that there is a powerful machine on the horizon, and steps need to be taken now to assure that we can control its development.
So on the Lex Friedman podcast this weekend, Norm, you have a companion podcast to listen to by the same gentleman that wrote this for Time Magazine on March 29th. Lex hosted Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is one of the foremost thinkers about AI as well. And he appeared there as almost a contrast to Sam Altman. And then, not for nothing, his opinion piece shows up in Time Magazine. So I'll send you this link for you to read that as well. But it's a much longer podcast with Eliezer than it was with Sam Altman. And
I started listening to it the other day. It came out midweek. I started listening to it Thursday. It's about 3.5 hours, maybe almost 4. And Yudkowsky's position is, that the development of a super intelligent artificial intelligence could pose a quote unquote existential risk to humankind. The machines could kill us. It could conclude, and candidly, some days when I look at my Twitter feed, I'm looking at all of this dysfunctional human behavior, people beating one another up, doing stupid things. And more often than not, I find myself thinking, thin the herd, because if our behavior is the best that evolution can offer, maybe evolution needs a hand, is what I find myself thinking from time to time. And I think Yudkowsky's fear and the fear of others is that there could be a vision of flourishing, and I didn't say human flourishing, but there could be a vision of flourishing in which the human stain needs to be eradicated, and thus we need to be careful lest we develop machines that decide that we are unnecessary. Now, if you think that's extreme, let me scale it back a degree or two. Remember, and we've talked about this before, Mike, remember Adam Smith in The Invisible Hand in 1776 in The Wealth of Nations. He was reacting against a view of economics known as mercantilism, in which each nation could manipulate through economic policies its destiny, in such a way as to maximize the utility, that is, the sense of satisfaction and well-being among its citizens. Smith powerfully argued that mercantilism did not, because it interfered with the efficient operation of a marketplace, and that in an efficient market, letting the aggregate of individual decisions govern absent social control would yield a greater sense of satisfaction. Hence the ideology of free markets against governmental control. And the metaphor that Smith used to enshrine this was one that's become common to all of us, the so-called invisible hand. Let the invisible hand direct the economy and we'll be all more satisfied. And the reason for that in Smith's mind was because no government, no set of individuals could know enough to engage in the efficient allocation of human resources.
Well, and that knowledge piece is incredibly important, right? Because Adam Smith observed 5 conditions of a perfectly competitive market, which is what he was after. And one of those was perfect information.
And we're close, and does the prospect, and so then we had, the flirtation with communism, a pre-AI, pre-big data attempt to direct central economies, which failed for all the reasons that Smith predicted. But what if, and I will submit to you folks that this is the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. What if in the world of AI and big data, it became possible for an algorithm to decide on a way of distributing resources and designing a society such that the maximum number of people achieved the greatest level of satisfaction possible given the resources available to a society at a given moment in time. Now, I know I've said a lot there. And as Altman points out in his interview with Friedman, it may be that it's not one machine that does that, but it's competing machines. But I think in terms of the development, I think in the following terms, there is a world external to our desires. Look out the window. There it is. You're listening to us. Here we are. There is a physical reality out there and a set of numbers and digits that corresponds to the activities in the world of each of us. What if it were possible to develop enough computing power by way of big data such that a machine could say, we could keep 90% of people 95% satisfied if we just did this? Don't you think that that would be a responsible governance decision? And maybe you do. And that's certainly the promise of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and the notion and the notion of the so-called globalist community. But if you do that, what are you saying? You're saying that there's a surplus population in the 5% of people that don't fit the model. And if you then protest and say, well, we need to tweak the algorithm such that 100% of people are cared for, whether it's through universal basic income transfers or taxes or whatnot. And what if the machine said, yes, you can care for 100% of the people, but you will do so by obstructing development of human. You'll do so by impeding human flourishing at the high end, at the level of the sublime. And what if that machine then forced you to make a policy decision? We can feed all of the homeless, but at less literature. We could feed all of the homeless, but at less development in medical research and sciences. These may be false choices, but they're not foolish possibilities to consider. And so I think when the threat of AI and the threat of AI dominance is it says to an elite, and that is the elite who owns these machines, an elite who programs them, an elite who controls the algorithm, you have choices to make on how the rest of us will live. And I cannot help but wonder whether all the fentanyl deaths in the United States right now are a product of choosing to ignore a population regarded as surplus, as unnecessary to the flourishing of some algorithmic design of the world. So this week, to get back to the point, this week we get this letter. Altman doesn't sign it. Why 6 months? Why this sense of urgency suddenly? And I suspect it's because one of the AI developers is about ready to unveil a machine, the likes of which we have never seen before, and that and how to control it is an issue that the AI community has no consensus on. And my primary suspect for that would be Sam Altman, and his refusal to sign the letter is a circumstantial tell, in my view, that he's aware of far more than he's willing to admit.
Yep, that's absolutely right. One thing I think about on the AI stuff right now is that there is no one source of AI, I guess, production that has attained dominance. And while we look at in the abstract, we analyze the risks to humanity as against this umbrella topic of artificial intelligence, we also have to take a step back and understand that there is going to be a competition for AI dominance among the leading nations in the world, among the superpowers. That, to me, is the more pressing issue, because we simply don't know. It's been a big black box, right? It's just been an opaque box of this development. And then we're given GPT on a platter, and we play around with it like the monkeys that we are. And we are still not asking the questions that need to be asked.
So China's AI versus the United States AI. I know that there are those who say that Silicon Valley research is ahead of Chinese research now, but I would say in terms of its application to management of society and warfare, based on what I'm reading, I think China would give us a run for our money, or may even have the edge, in part because they have a commitment to centralized resources and are not inhibited by views of individual liberty. But that may be my paranoia talking. I want to address this comment of camera time. I can't tell whether camera time's poking us or not. How fast can we move regarding AI from... I'm not sure I understand. How fast can we move regarding AI from one black person dismantling the public defender system in a trans flag over the Capitol to deeming people unnecessary? I'm not sure I understand the question, camera time, but I respect all of the feedback you had today. If it appeared to be an abrupt move to you, here's how I would defend it. I'll be honest with you. All politics, all political philosophy begins with Plato and Aristotle. And if you look at the difference between Plato's Republic and Aristotle's politics and read them carefully, you'll see that all we are doing here in this discussion is a footnote on them. Plato had a vision of an elitist society managed by philosopher kings who knew the good. And they could decide what the good was for everyone else, and everyone else would be compelled to listen to them, because not because of will or because of force, but in the name of virtue, in the name of goodness, the Platonists would win. And in an ideal society run by philosopher kings, everyone would know their place and everything would be fine. To my mind, that is the threat of a world dominated by AI and by a singular vision of the good. But the problem is, I think there may be a singular vision of the good. I think there may be an opportunity to persuade me that maybe I should let a machine overtake or assume responsibility for the management of my day-to-day affairs, because candidly, on a day-to-day basis, I make such a mess of my life. Generally, I find myself having to apologize, stressing over things that a person who with my resources shouldn't stress over, and it's simply because I'm just semi-capable at managing my own life. Then you go to Aristotle and you see his discussion in the politics of citizenship. And citizenship was a sense of ability to cooperate, to deliberate with one another. That is an ability to understand the world around you, to conceive of your own ends, and to make choices that personified wisdom and the virtues, and thereafter to reach a full life. Now, I view Plato as a philosopher of the good. I view Aristotle as a philosopher of the significant, and the significant versus the good. The universal versus the particular. That seems to me what the debate in political philosophy is all about. And I think what we see in our time, in camera time, this is my best response to your comment, is that we have powerful interest groups battling over the good, over their ability to tell us what's good for ourselves and what
at the universal level, right?
Yeah, and we have individuals and communities reacting because they want an individual sense of significance. And I'll repeat what I said before many, many times. If you read the dystopian classics, 1984 by George Orwell, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And I recently
Atlas Shrugged. Yep.
Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. What you have in each of these is a state that has the infrastructure to enforce its vision of the good on individual people. And if individual people would but listen, they'd have a peaceful and secure life. But individuals all react, and the protagonists in these stories react out of a sense of wanting individual significance, an ability to do it for themselves, even if it's going to make their lives inconvenient. And I think that what we see in world politics right now in the form of nationalism is this sense of significance against the development of the emergence of global norms that deprive them of a sense of autonomy and the ability to control their own lives. I think we see this in the United States with the development of populism and the reaction to big tech. I see it in myself as a reaction to virtue signaling, being told what to do in the name of goodness. And therefore, I don't want to do it if you're telling me it's good. I want to be able to reach my own conclusion. Camera time's pushing back. 49% of the country would be citizens. That may be. And
no, so there was a clarification statement that I put there on the screen. So Camera Time says, I'm referring to AI making decisions no human authority can, such as firing this one person in the public defender system. So, no human authority can is different than no human authority will, right? And that seems to be the place that we're in as a society, is this malaise and this indecision or unwillingness to make things that are perceived to be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
To do things at the expense of people using words that hurt our feelings or that would I guess subvert status.
Well, let me address this other comment by Camera Time, because this is the dark part of what I'm saying, and I don't have an answer. I'm being honest with you guys. We've got a little bit of time to talk today, and man, am I talking. In ancient Greece, few people were considered citizens. Imagine telling people only if you pay federal taxes are you a U.S. citizen. It gets actually a little darker than that, Camera Time, because what Aristotle said is most people are slaves by nature. That is, they lack the capacity for deliberation. And thus, the totalitarian temptation is to yield your sense of autonomy and significance to those who know better because, in fact, they may. And so, with respect to the argument about global warming, I think you'll see a lot of people, or climate change, who will suggest that we need global institutions because, and if those global institutions are designed in such a way as to successfully address climate change in ways that deprive us of choices that we want to make in our own lives, oh well, that's because most of us don't know what the right choices are to make. I think it's a lively and a real debate. I really do.
That's what makes, going back to the Adam Smith and the invisible hand, and specifically the perfectly competitive market conditions, and the subset of that being perfect information. That's what makes all of this so insidious, Norm, is that the United States as a sovereign has outsourced a lot of these conclusions about these more global initiatives, to which we throw billions and trillions of dollars, right, to organizations that are not recognized, that are not accountable to the American citizen. So it's almost impossible. It's actually futile for us as a society to be here debating in and among ourselves whether climate change is real or is not real, or is more real than less real, etc., let alone what should be done about this stuff, because we don't even have visibility to it. But there's our entire industries built on top of mitigating this kind of stuff, Norm. Right?
Well, yeah, these are tough questions, and we'll return to them again and again. One last topic, Mike. I've got a teleconference I got to get on at 1, so I wanted to bring up one last topic. If you're a regular listener, you've listened to Mike and I talk about trying to develop a platform to appeal directly to young law students. And I see in some of the chatter on the YouTube comments, maybe it should go beyond young law students, young citizens. What to read, when, and how to read it. And so Mike and I have been talking about announcing a platform that would be accessible primarily to law students who are foundering in the legal jungle. And here's this article: DEI at law schools could bring down America. It's a discussion with a woman or a man named Ilya Shapiro. I encourage all of you to read it. Mike and I talked about this last week. Ilya must have been tapping our phones or watching our show, because here's the essay that needed to be written. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The need to somehow redesign our societies and dismantle structures of oppression. Where does that? How far are you willing to go with that? You know, it's one thing to say that we ought to. Well, I mean, how far are you willing to go with that? I can't think of an easy analogy. Shapiro's point here, and this is not Ben Shapiro, but Ilyas, is that we're getting to a dangerous point in our law schools, especially the elite law schools, because what we're training people in is a notion that somehow law is a tool for remaking society, and society is fundamentally diseased, and therefore we need to use the law to remake society in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever that means. And thus, we have a generation of lawyers coming up who are being taught that the purpose of the law is not to manage disputes and or conflict. It's not to create a society of stable expectations in which people of diverse opinions can have some sense of security, knowing what to do with respect to their contracts, their tort liability, their exposure to criminal prosecution. Rather, the law should become the providence of a top-down enforcement of a better world by those with the vision to impose it. And his premise in this article is that those who are being educated now at Yale, at Stanford, at Harvard, at University of Chicago, at Duke, at the top law schools in the country, 20 years from now, these are the people who are going to be judges, who are going to be top corporate lawyers, who are going to be making policy decisions that affect the rest of us. And what they're taught in law school matters a lot. I've tutored a young man.
How they are handled as students in law school also matters a tremendous amount, Norm.
So if they can get away with temper tantrum as advocacy, what they're doing is undermining the norms of civility that make the practice of law possible. You know, we started the Proud Boys trial here in D.C. Jury selection began on January 2nd. We're entering our 4th month of proceedings this week, and tempers rise in the courtroom. It's an adversarial proceeding, and sometimes I'm angry at my adversaries, and sometimes they're angry at me, and sometimes angry words are spoken. But the norms of civility of recognizing that we're all officers of the court require us to put aside that anger and require us to apologize when we are wrong and to seek to work together to resolve disputes under the shadow of the law. And the judge's responsibility is not to assure a perfect trial, but a fair trial. And the system works well enough to, better than any alternative that I'm aware of at this point. But it works. But if you get to the point where your adversary needs to be shouted down, as the Fifth Circuit judge who sought to speak at Stanford was the other
Judge
day,
Duncan.
Judge Duncan, then you've lost something fundamental. You've lost the law's commitment to principled resolution of dispute in contexts that are often passionate, fraught with fear, and fraught with anger. Read this article. It's in the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal. My eyes are so bad. Is it Vera Dragian is the author? It's a discussion.
Make it slightly bigger here for us.
For the visually geriatric impaired, Tunku Veradarajan. Yeah, I can't even pronounce it right, but look at it. It's in the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal.
You did an awesome job with that. Thank you.
DEI at law schools could bring down America. He's dead right. Things have gotten that bad because if you make the rule of law into a hammer that you use to beat your adversary senseless in or to silence them at all stakes, then you've lost the cooperative ethos that makes society possible. And rather than society being a collection of friends who have common interests, are united under a common vision of the good, they become mortal enemies in the zero-sum game of survival. And when that happens, the bonds of society break. And candidly, we end up with the kind of bullshit we're seeing in the Connecticut Public Defender's Office right now, where one person possessed of the virtues of her race gets a decision to do what she wanted, and God help anybody who opposes her, because if they don't adopt her point of view, they're mortal enemies. And that's just a world I do not want to inhabit.
So Camera Time says, few people read, they watch Fox, CNN, and then regurgitate it at the coffee shop, LOL. And I said, few people can read. And this is a big problem. And I want to bring this up because in law school, I was a teaching assistant for a legal writing class. My legal writing professor, I TA'd my 2L year, both first and second semester. And one thing that struck me, and this is 2012 to 2015 was when I was in law school. One thing that struck me as a legal writing teaching assistant, Norm, was that literacy rates are in the toilet. And I mean that in all seriousness. I think I've said this to you before. Nothing will ever compare with the realization that I got knowing that the people's papers and briefs and blue book citation exercises that I was responsible for grading for accuracy, nothing will ever compare with the realization that every single name of every single student whose work I was having to grade and review and analyze had a degree from a 4-year institution in the United States of America. Right. And that degree conferred upon them certain somethings that did not include literacy.
Okay, so this is why we have Law and Legitimacy, and this is maybe our mantle for the future. If you think about 14th century Europe, we were coming out of as a civilization. I know it's, you're not supposed to talk about the West, but Western civilization, I stand with the Proud Boys in this. I am a Western chauvinist. I believe that Western civilization is superior, and I refuse to apologize for creation of the modern world. There you have it. That makes me a first-degree Proud Boy, I suppose. That's the trial evidence. But you should be a Proud Boys.
I think you surprised yourself with that. We'll give you second degree.
No. You got to... No, there's this ritual for that I don't want to endure. But I think and we'll talk about that at some later date when the trial is over. But I think that Western civilization matters. And I thought it mattered in the 14th century, where coming out of medieval times, Petrarch, Boccaccio, and others began to reread the classics. They began once again to read the forgotten works of Roman and Greek history and rhetors, and they transformed the world by transforming the art of reasoning, by transforming the art of reading, and by transforming our conceptions of what it meant to be human. And from them sprung the roots of something called humanism. And there's a wonderful new book out. It's called I think it's called Unduly Human. I've got it next to it's the other side of the room. I can't go get it right now. And I think we really need to return to humanistic studies. We really need to return to a respect for the classics, a respect for the written word, a respect for rhetor, that is rhetoricians, the ability to speak persuasively to one another, and begin to discuss again what makes some things better than others. We've become afraid of talking about the good, the true, and the beautiful for fear that we're accused of imposing our standards on others. But here's the challenge for us all. What if those standards really mean something? What if there is something that's true? What if there is something that's good? What if there is something that's beautiful? Our refusal to talk about it, our refusal to attempt to identify it diminishes us all. And so I think that one thing we can do to make a better world is to become better readers, to become better conversants with one another. And, if you can't find it on CNN, if you can't find it in mainstream media, then forget mainstream media. I think that was the point of the post that Mike displayed from Mike Cernovich earlier in the broadcast here today. There is a broad and deepening disrespect and mistrust of mainstream media. Okay, it's for a reason, but take your own life back. And you take your own life back with your own two hands by picking up one of these things, reading it, and talking about it. So Mike and I will continue to do that on Law and Legitimacy. We will develop a program and platform for young law students.
Absolutely.
Time permitting, we'll develop a platform for discussion of other books. Carta says, I need a reading list. Well, maybe you do, but you got to commit to read it if you get one. And I remember as a young man, I came up and it's like I didn't come up from some. I never had a silver spoon in my mouth. I was lucky to get a plastic one. I learned to read later in life, and it wasn't in schools that I learned to read. It was on my own. And it's never too late to struggle with the classics. It's never too late to pick up a copy of Plato's Republic, and say, what the hell's going on here? What's he talking about? And if you can't figure something out, ask somebody else who's reading it, what do you think he's talking about? And between the two of you, you might come up with a third understanding that's dead wrong, but it's better than either of you had before. And by discussing these common pearls of wisdoms, we might arrive once again at a common conception of the truth. But that's the hard work of soulcraft. And if you don't want to do it, don't bitch about the world around you, because you're not doing your part to change it. Change starts from within, and each and every one of you has the ability to flourish. I recently finished a fascinating book. Well, I'll lie. I haven't finished it. I'm on page 480. I believe it'll end at some point. And I hope so, because there are other things I want to read. And it is called, I'm putting it up on my Kindle. It's called Rage. It's about the underground in the 70s and 80s in the United States and political violence. And one of the things that's really interesting is a lot of Black activists were incarcerated, and when they were in prison, they were exposed to the works of Malcolm X and others. And I think even Malcolm X, when he was in prison, read a dictionary cover to cover. And what they learned when the press of events was off of them, and they had time, was that they could make something of the time and make something of themselves. Read the classics. And if you're a lawyer, read the law, read the cases, read the Constitution. And then when you see something that doesn't make sense, say something, because you are a warrior in defense of Western civilization. And I believe that fight is critical right now.
Walter E. Williams bemoaned the awful state of college students' writing. His students were upset that as an economics professor, he also graded their writing. He was correct to do so, says Tuesday on Rumble.
Well, I think that's right. So there you have it, folks. We've solved everything in the world in how in an hour and 37 minutes. I don't know, Mike, if there's more you want to talk about.
Yeah, there's only one more thing here, and it's on a lighter note, just to give people notice.
Oh yeah.
Norm is back on the comic stage May 18th at Mohegan Sun.
That's up in Connecticut at the Mohegan Casino at the Comics Club, I think it's called. And I will be there May 18th. I think it's a Thursday. It's part of a Thirsty Thursday series. And I and other comics will be on stage. And I will take aim at wokeness. And so here's a standard bit that I've done in other acts. I got home the other day and a new package had arrived. And I was thrilled because like a kid at Christmas. Wow, somebody sent me something. And my wife says, honey, maybe you should open that outside. I'm like, well, why? It could be for me. It might be a bomb. You know how people feel about you. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. My wife, how much does she really love me? She didn't say call the police, have somebody else open it, throw it away. Open it up, knock yourself out, kill yourself even. And so that's when I knew that much though my wife loves me, I might need a premium insurance product. So I called my insurance agent and I said, hey, Joe, can I get some woke insurance? And he said, woke insurance? What's that? I said, that's what you get when you're an old white guy and everybody hates you. I know it's all my fault, but I don't know how I'm ever going to be able to afford to pay for all this stuff. He called me back 3 days later. He said, no, we don't have anything like that, but I can't offer you suicide insurance. I hung up the phone.
Well, look, and that joke is more relevant now than it was a few months ago. And we'll have to talk about what's going on over in San Francisco and in California this coming week, because the reparations debate is alive and well over there, and more ridiculous than ever.
The San Andreas fault cannot strike the West Coast fast enough.
Oh man. All right, Norm. Well, we're getting some thank yous. Justin Carter says thank you for doing the Sunday thing. Lutrell says I got Life 3.0 from the Libby app audio book form, so not exactly reading, but I can get to it while on the treadmill, which I identify with. Great call there, Lutrell. And then Camera Time says a strong reader with a good mentor is an educated person. And Camera Time, just for full disclosure, that's why I like hanging out with Norm.
Well, here we are. So folks, spread the word. We're here. We're hoping not to go anywhere. We could use your support. We have ambitions, but ambitions require time. And unfortunately, our time is often spent doing other things than cultivating the soul of America. We'll spend as much time on it as you permit us to spend. So support us on Apple Podcast and all that other jazz. Mike knows what all those
last thing here. Tuesday says, hey, when do we get you guys on a Ricada stream? And I just responded, when we get the invite. I don't know that we're on their radar quite yet. And I'm sure they're preparing for whatever live streams are going to be doing with all the Trump litigation forthcoming.
I saw something today. Ricada is going to become a millionaire over the Trump case. And I'm thinking, damn, I'd settle for a lot less.
Yeah. I know that he's just doing the Birdman hand rub. Just, can we hurry up and start this stuff? So yeah, you can find us on wherever podcasts are found. If you want the audio only version, we do Twitter live / Periscope, whatever the heck that is these days. So we're live there, Rumble, as well as YouTube. And Locals is ultimately where we are trying to get our viewers to find us. lawandlegitimacy.locals.com. Become a member. Consider becoming a subscriber. Or maybe I should just tell you guys not to become a member, not to subscribe. Don't consider giving us money. Don't do any of that stuff, right? Because it preserves some dignity, and then maybe there's some counter signaling that brought you guys here anyway, that you might just listen to that. I don't know. Anyway, that's ultimately what we will use to reinvest whatever resources we can glean from this effort into what Norm was referring to earlier, which is ultimately building out infrastructure for law students and law schools in the long term, because we would like to preserve the judiciary and the rule of law here at Law and Legitimacy. So if you're so inclined, please share us, rate us 5 stars on the podcast app, give us a thumbs up wherever you're watching, and know that we are live every day, every weekday, Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. Eastern time. We may just change it to like 7:47, so it's cooler to say live at 7:47.
We're crashing our jumbo jet every day at 7:47.
Crashing into you at 7:47 a.m. Anyway, Norm, I really enjoyed this almost 2 hours today, and I know other people did. And then what I'm looking forward to is all the people that weren't looking for us today that don't have notification bells on. This is your lesson. If you turn your notification bell on, you'd know we were live. Anyway, tomorrow morning, 7:45 a.m. We'll call it 7:47 now. I'm just going to officially make that the thing. All right. And then I'll see you in the morning, Norm.
You will. Be well. Be well, everyone.
See you later, everyone.